ready tech-wise? Great. So welcome everyone on site in person. Welcome everyone on Zoom. Is it too loud? Not loud enough? What are you trying to communicate? Mic check, test, test. All right, seems to be working. I just said warm welcome to everyone on site, in person. Warm welcome to everyone online. We have 7 people in our virtual community with us. And yeah, my name is Gerriet. I'm glad to host this session. We will have 1.5 hours together for this session with the gorgeous name Concurrent Session 2A. We will have first half an hour from Sylvia, Amar. She will tell us about laboratories for planet-wide scale ecological design. And afterwards, we will have half an hour with 3 lovely human beings on my right, talking about their research project, Ecovillage Transition in Action. And afterwards, we will have half an hour for dialogue, for questions, remarks, comments, ideas, whatever pops up. So hope this serves you as a first overview. And then I would like to hand it over to you, Sylvia. So nice to see you here. We have been in the Gen Research circle for the last
Maybe you
months.
can put it there.
And yeah, had some exchange of ideas in this smaller circle of researchers. And I'm really glad to see you again in this in the context of this conference. And would like to ask you to introduce yourself and go over to your presentation. And I will just give you a sign, 5 minutes and 2 minutes left for your presentation to finalize your thoughts within the next half an hour. So.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Gerriet. Thanks for these first words. I will briefly introduce myself. First, I would like to ask you if we start right now to share with the slide. Maybe it will be easier to start with that. I'm doing that and then, okay. Okay, I have to do it. Oh, there is something strange. I don't have the same possibilities than yesterday when we made the test. So, wait, okay. Oh, doesn't, no. We're not going to have that. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry, I cannot. Ah, okay, it's coming. Sorry. Yeah, get it. Oh, and okay, and in the mode of the slide, I have to go to lecture. Is it okay for you?
The last slide.
Yeah. Now we see the last slide.
Looks fine.
Now we already
Yes. Okay. So we're going to start with the first one. But do you see the whole screen or also is it okay for you?
Now it's perfect.
Perfect.
Okay. So, but I cannot see you on the side of my screen. I don't know why it was working yesterday, but today it's like that. So we're going to take it like it is and not wasting time. So thank you to everybody for welcoming me in that conference, and thank you, Gerriet, for introduction. So we start very quickly to keep as much as time we need to have discussions. I am an historian of architecture, and my PhD has been defended 2 years ago, exactly in July 2020, about architecture, history of architecture. So I will present you today a very small part of my research, but one of the question of the laboratories applied to communities is like one of my conclusions, and one of my also what I demonstrated all along my PhD. So the question is, how and why could we consider ecovillages as laboratories of architecture? And what if this architecture was very similar to an alternative architectural trend named ecological design, which is actually not very well known even in the field of architecture. So my field of research, I studied very briefly. This is the history of contemporary art, and also intersecting other disciplines as sociology, philosophy, and economics. The purpose is, of course, to bring a new focus on transformative utopias and alternative architectural trend. And as a method of base, I made a comparative study of 8 communitarian sites in the USA and Europe from 1965 to 2015. And the opening of my reflection is to propose that ecovillages could be inspiring laboratories for a better way to live on Earth. And this is also something that I heard in the question that Ross Jackson was asking this morning about how if ecovillages were the best invention of the 20th century. So I could say yes for 20th century, but also would like to say yes for also 19th century and the centuries before. So I go to my second slide. So I will today address 2 questions: how and why architectural forms in communitarian experiences evolved in the USA and Europe over the last 50 years, and why ecovillages can be considered as laboratories of an existing, still alternative ecological trend. On the background of ecological emergency context, which is quite really important, and that I underline today very, very briefly, this question of the Earthrise Apollo 8 mission is very important, because this is the first image that we have from the moon, of Earth from the moon, and this is the moment we realize how much the Earth is alone, fragile, and isolated in the universe. And then 5 years after, there is this other photo, the blue marble, which is also very well known, and Michel Lusseau, the French geographer, calls it the first image of the Anthropocene. And actually, this image has been made by during the Apollo 17 mission in December 72, and shows the Earth concentrating itself on the human activities. And 1 year, just few months after, the International Career of UNESCO was already raising up the questions, the environmental questions, with this cover Only One Earth. And at least 50 years after, the second report, Still Only One Earth, in 2015. The report of the Royal Society of Chemistry, observing that the 26 resolutions adopted by the International Assembly of the United Nations in Stockholm in 72 have not been implemented. So this is the context we have, and we have to do with that. So, and for this presentation, I will try first to recall the architectural evolutions of the communitarian world from the 60s to the present day, and also talking about their constructive methodology, specific methodologies, and analyzing them through the field of architecture, I guess, reveals that the field in architecture is itself not well known, and that there is probably a point that we have to make converge through at least research. Just a very quick glance on the different fields I've been studying during my PhD. And you can see here, of course, Alingalil, that was, oh, the mouse doesn't function, so I'm sorry, but on the right side, you have Alingalil, and Camellia were there this morning. And yes, this was a very, very great experience to meet them. So I studied Lama Foundation, Arcosanti, Earthship, La Cité Ecologique in Quebec, Torre Superiore in Italy, the Ecological City in Quebec also, which is a kind of duplication of the Cité Ecologique, and Alingalil and Le Hameau des Buis. Then the first question, of course, how and why architectural forms? First perspective from history of architecture. History of ideas, sociology, deep ecologies are the background, and bioregionalism, of course. Yes, and I would like to underline one context, two effects, and a shift and a paradox. Okay. What you can see on this slide, this is that since the early 20th ecovillages, since the early 20s, 200, sorry, not the 20s, the 2000s, the ecovillages have rediscovered vernacular practices associated to increasingly ecological constructions better integrated into territories. Then back to the land community, if we go back in the time of the 60s to the 80s, introduced architectures of protest, symbolizing both their desire to break with the bourgeois order and awareness of ecological issue. And we have those studies from Felicity Scott and Greg Castillo that are really, really interesting of this question. So one of my observations was to say that architecture has always fulfilled a central place in the communitarian world. As a primary mode of expression, it allows the full embodiment of a social project. And we can say also that even the first religious communities that left Europe to settle on American soil were inspired by biblical texts to build their housing and shared spaces at the pilgrims. And in the 19th century, social utopias as Phalanstère, Nularnak, Harmony were also inspired by those thinkers. So this is quite important because we can actually say that there was first kind of social projects and then architecture able to represent them and not only represent, but being also an expression. And that's why the countercultural architecture of the 60s are really interesting, because they realize a kind of anti-bourgeois architecture. They explore the codes of architecture, they explore the space, and they also introduce ecological ways to build that are not traditional, but that are looking on the recycling materials and also garbage, and also what all is left by the society of consumption. Sorry, 6, okay. So what we can say is that in 50 years, countercultural architectures shift, and an explosion with an explosion of the bourgeois order space, and the geodesic dome is a kind of witness of that shift. And actually there are also now in the Ecovillage is a kind of reinterpretation of the geodesic dome, as well as in Alingalil, and the one who will go there, we will see that there are very beautiful reinterpretation of them. And the shift actually goes toward a village-like master plan. And this is very interesting because we go back to kind of vernacular ways to inhabit the space and to construct and to build it. And also what I would like to say is that hybrid and diverse communitarian practices question strong concept in architectures as modernity, technology, progress, and style. I will not develop that here, but if you have question about that, this could be interesting. Well, a village-like master plan, as you can see, well, I was talking about this shift in 50 years. The formal expression so evolved from a tendency to architectures as signal, I was talking about the dome, to a village-like configuration. This means the will to integrate the landscape, showing a broader interest for local territories. And then we can go to refer as different theory as bioregionalism movement in the USA and territorialism in Europe. The small village is kind of a community house, shared facilities, individual or collective dwellings becomes usual master plan. And the eco-village is kind of new ideal to be prototyped. It's a common architectural feature, but all experience is unique. And you can see how Rose Jackson also was talking this morning about this feeling to be like in family. And when you look at the way these villages, these eco-villages are built or arranged or organized, you find a family also here. You can feel this idea that there is a kind of big family of eco-villages all around the world. But also what we can see that there is a paradox where they express the singularity of their social project. Eco-villages shape themselves in a way that makes them identifiable in the great worldwide movement of eco-villages. So a belonging to an international network makes stronger, but encourage to adopt certain formal and aesthetic codes. Eco-villages architecture is more ecological today, but less singular than the one of the 60s, 70s communities experiment. And we also can refer to the works of Felicity Scott and Greg Castillo in a very, very interesting book called Epi-Modernism. And as a conclusion of this first question, I would like to say that this shift and paradox nevertheless highlights that there is an historical continuity between communities and eco-villages guided by the permanent desire to live and build ecologically. And this historical continuity, I could have showed that from the 19th century and even before, but it was too short for today. And there is an evolution actually from iconic building to village aesthetic, a shift from a commitment to a protesting architecture signal to a new interest for the territory. So today, eco-villages produce hybrid architectures that constitute a complex heritage between rupture and tradition. I would like also to highlight the question of the digital shift of the 19th that brought up a deep evolution and a new architectural level. This is a very important element of the context. A good example of it is precisely the conference we are all connected today in person or remotely. This is something different, new, and we are all exploring it right now, and that we take advantage of, especially with the COVID context that underlines deeply our way of living and traveling as well. Today, I guess we're part of a network architecture, thanks to the text. We are able to create, design new spaces of exchange and sharing. And you all know about this when you organize an online course or a symposium or a training, you become designers and you produce spaces with very specific qualities and aesthetics. I also would like to recall here that a network of phalanges was part of the 4 years phalanstère project, you know, in the 19th century, in the social utopias. Even if it was never built itself, the phalanstère as a building, Fourier had really this idea that phalanges should exist as a network all around the world. And what Fourier was not able to realize, because he didn't know that we will get internet, through internet, eco-villages have been able to invent that. And that I think that's why we can name today eco-villages as realizable utopias, as Yona Friedman, the architect, wrote it, or concrete utopias as sociologists like Michel Lallemand are working on. And this is very interesting that today utopias are not negative or marginal questions, people dreaming alone in their places, but real projects that are, of course, ideals that should be perfectible. The second question is about the laboratories, and then I will go back to the field of architecture very briefly, and trying to explain you how I could define a laboratory of architecture and what is natural ecological design. So actually, a laboratory of architecture, I was, my base was the work of historian and philosopher Beshara Elal. And I took his analyzed grid, and I tried to see if ecovillages can answer to that. And actually they can, in my point of view, because they are physically bounded places with a set of activities as links to the outside. And we have seen, we know that ecovillages use architectural tools and forms that evolve with time, context, and projects. They have appropriate methods. I will not demonstrate this today, but maybe a little bit at the end of my slide, with collective inhabitants, with workshops. They have social structures of collaboration to answer the complexity of the architectural project, shared governance, integration to the local level, connection with the worldwide network. So, as Beshara Elal defined them, we can admit that ecovillages are global devices for edification of potentialities. And I like very much the end of the sentence, edification of potentialities. Now I just show you, well, a kind of community-wide communities and ecovillages are laboratories because they are operating like laboratories, because they are kind of cradle of knowledge and methods. And here you can see all the theoretical and methodological tools that they can use across the history. And actually their history of they are linked to both history of utopia and history of ecology. And those two history can really be crossed. And you can see that there are a lot of convergence points. Well, I go briefly on that. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh. I'm sorry, I have a problem with my slide. Shit, il a planté. Hello? Oh putain, j'ai été déconnectée quoi. Oh fuck, j'en ai marre. Oh, putain, pourquoi ça marche pas? Pourquoi ça n'a pas marché là?
Now the presenter mode of the operating diagram.
She can't hear us.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Hey Sylvia, just to let you know.
Yeah, but I cannot see you anymore. I don't know where you are on my screen. So this is something very strange that happening to me. Okay, I'm back here. I didn't have that at all yesterday, so I do not understand why. So I'm really sorry.
No worries.
It happened suddenly. But did you hear me, or was it I've been cut or not?
Yes, Sylvia, we can hear you. We also see you, and we see the presenter mode of the operating diagram.
Yeah, okay. Well, I guess I will stay like this because, of course, this is not the best way to show the diapo. Ah, this is it. Okay, this is better. Okay, so I am back on track, I guess. Where was I? The operating diagram. So this diagram, very briefly, is summarized and describes the way laboratories of ecotopic architecture does operate as I developed in the research itself. And as you can see, communities and ecovillages are at the center and converge to them the theoretical and methodological fields that cross and or have exchange with their approaches. So I will go ahead and we can go back to that if people have questions. And now from the field of architecture, what is the question? I would like to present you very briefly this work of Sim van der Rijn. Is an architect, actually originally from Europe, and he was raised in the USA. And this architect is actually quite known in California, but not in the architectural field. And what he was written in the 70s inspired me very well when I discovered his writings. And he was talking at that time of natural design, and he explained what it is. And today he's calling this ecological design. So it's a kind of shift in his way to describe this. But natural, I feel, is a very strong expression, especially for architectural trends. So what is natural design? Natural design environment will use up fewer non-renewable resources, rely more on income energy from sun, wind, water, and organic sources, provide its inhabitants with a closer contact with natural cycles, whether in the city or country, involve inhabitants directly in providing for many of their own needs, be in harmony with its natural surrounding, blur the distinction between production and consumption, work, play, and learning, strive for aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual satisfaction. I discovered this text at the moment I was, 5, okay, I'm going to be good. At the moment I was working on ecovillages, and for me it was kind of definition of what was an eco-village and what was the purpose of the communities. So I guess that, well, I just show you a few slides of Sim van der Rijn's work that you can understand what I'm talking about. And as conclusion for today, I'd like to recall last time that historically ecovillages propose numerous alternatives to fight against climate change effect. They raise up a total architectural approach in an economical, social, ethical dimensions, and also architectural. They are real experience where the field of architecture could get strong inspiration. And why I'm talking about that? Because now the field of architecture is not really well, equipped to challenge the climate change problems, because the field of construction is providing 30% of greenhouse gas. So in architecture, we really have to change many things. And I guess that the natural and ecological design, and what some very few schools, training programs for architects are doing in the world that are very close to the communitarian practices, could be very inspiring. So there is this school of design in Vermont, USA, and there is a long tradition of building workshop in communities. You can have a photo of Arcosanti, Lama Foundation, and Le Hameau des Buis as well in France. Well, this was my bibliography. I just wanted to, well, I guess I will stop here just to open the field of discussion. My purpose was to say that there are two fields that none known in even communities, and eco-villages are considered in the margins of societies, but we see that the movement is growing and growing everywhere in the world. Ecological design is not well known in architecture, but they have same methodologies, they have same approaches. And now the profession of architects is raising up also to have this kind of methodology of work in the, well, you know, trainings with hands-on work. And this is very important because when you see the images, it's not only an image. It's like when you look at Yestermore students on the here on my slide up. I don't know why my mouse doesn't work. And when you look at the Hameau des Buis workshop building, you see that there are a lot of similarity. It's not only an image, it's a way to do things. And my purpose today is to make those two fields meeting, and I'm gonna try to do that through first my research, my new research, and my postdoc project. Thanks for, well, few bibliographic references for people interested in, and well, that's it. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I can imagine that you sit with many questions, and I invite you to just sit with them for another half an hour, because we will have first the presentation of the Ecovillage transition project, and afterwards half an hour for questions, ideas, comments on both presentations. So I just hand it over to the three of you. I would be glad if you invite and introduce yourself shortly. And
I think it would be great to have the slides over there.
Yeah. So probably you're working on the slides. I just give the title again, Ecovillage Transition in Action, and I would be glad if you introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. So we were going to stand up, but I think we'll sit down and we'll do it here. So this is going to be very much a team effort from not just those of us who are up here, but some of our colleagues who were not able to be here in person, particularly Roman, Hausmann, and Sylvia. So if I start, my name is Rehema White, and I work at the University of St Andrews, which is in Scotland. But I also hang out with communities and in communities to some extent as well, and also with local authorities. I've spent many hours in committee rooms.
Hi, I'm Paula Duffy. I'm from the University of Aberdeen, also in Scotland, just a little bit further north. And I am a geographer working in social geography, so interested in community and sustainable transitions.
Yeah, hello, my name is Anne Schwab. I'm working at the University of Fechter. I'm also part of Gen Germany and actually living myself in the community. I'm a PhD and I wrote my academic work about transformation in rural areas and Ecovillage and its transformative practices in its region, actually, and I'm currently working about sustainability entrepreneurship.
Does this work if I just press no? Which one do I need to press?
Probably this one, if the whole thing is turned on, seems to be on. Sorry, can we get some tech support on slides?
That's okay. Well, we'll carry on talking in the meantime. So this picture that you can see behind you, this is actually taken from the tower, or one of the towers, which is at Schloss Tonnendorf in Germany. And we met as part of the project there not long ago. We thought it was a good place to start because Schloss Tonnendorf is a community where it's an eco-village where they've really been trying to think about how they can engage beyond their community. So how can they take some of the things that they're doing within their community and either scale these up or scale these across or do these differently with their communities just outside of the eco-village. And so as you look from the tower beyond into the, is that gonna work? Nope. As you look, try again. Do I need to, what do I point to that way? Okay, we're there. We're at the next slide now. So as we look from the tower out, we can start to see the effects of these kinds of collaborations, and we start to see that some of the activities of the Ecovillage are being changed in different kinds of ways as we go. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to give you a little bit of an introduction, what our topic is, then we're going to talk about the project. We're going to give you some of our conceptual framework as we start to write this up and think about it. Our methods, some selected results and discussion, because we've got so many, we're not able to tell you everything we found, and some conclusions. Yeah, that way. No. So where did we start? I think everybody here knows that, okay, thanks. I think everybody here knows that intentional communities can really be places for innovation that can be place-based and really thinking about new regenerative practices, but also drawing on regenerative practices from the past and bringing them into the contemporary era. At the same time, ecovillages sit within contexts of local government, where local government has a mandate and often an obligation to try to ensure that sustainability policies that are often emerging from a national level are implemented in local places. Local authorities also have the power sometimes to create structural changes which can facilitate some of the things that eco-villages want to do. So the meeting particularly of these two different groups can be really important in thinking about scaling either regenerative practices or sustainability action, depending on your action and depending on your language. And this is what the focus of our project has been on, is how do we move along the path together? How do we work across these different entities to scale community action? No, I've gone too far. Sorry. There's been a little bit of work elsewhere looking at scaling community action and how this might work in different ways. And a recent paper came out which started to try and develop a typology. So in what ways can we think about scaling? Initially, we talked about scaling up, making something bigger, but sometimes that's not relevant. Sometimes it's also about stabilizing something and embedding it so that it will be there for the long term, speeding it up, perhaps replicating it in the same kind of way that the Global Ecovillage Network tries to replicate and share practices across different entities. And perhaps scaling more deeply, so doing something better in a way that's going to last. And they summarize this as the need for amplification within, amplifying out, and amplifying beyond, different ways of thinking about scaling. But within this, they said, we don't need just to think about the numbers. We also need to think about how these kinds of initiatives can start to create transformative change. So how can this be more than just perhaps something that's happening outside of an eco-village, but starting to push society towards transformation in a different way? Well, I'm not doing very well with this, am I? Okay. Sorry. There we go. That's it.
So actually, I'm about telling about the project.
Yeah, you're
right?
telling about the project.
This is a success project, actually, what we started about. And it was about bringing up community facilitators, trainers, and academics into one room and have an experience of living and working together in a kind of very transdisciplinary project. So there was an NGO, Gen International, Gen Germany working together. There were academics like the University of St. Andrews and the University of Aberdeen. We actually had a whole research group up to the beginning.
Ecological.
And Ecological, of course, as an NGO. And they were working from that bottom up with communities up to the beginning. So it started actually always a meeting with people in communities themselves, started in Temesgen. And then once for suddenly they came forward. And all the data was online. So this may a very challenging moment, but I'm always here now.
You press the one on the right, yeah, and point it there. Yeah.
So it's actually an Erasmus Plus project, which aims to provide open and innovative educational materials designed to support both educators and adult learners, develop key competencies in cross-sectional partnership building, community building, participatory design, and collaboration between local authorities, communities, and citizens in primary school areas. So this was kind of part of the application. And what we did is like doing a lot of different things for the intellectual output. So we took a lot of interviews. With that interviews, we actually those that were provided for the academic result and actually for a toolkit, which is our first intellectual outcome, where there's videos have been provided or a lot of like best practice examples, how collaboration and local scale can actually happen. So in this toolkit of the first intellectual output, we inform about another generation like Gen, which is actually kind of connected now, I think, to the sustainable development goals. And we are telling about the different products Gen provides in order to collaborate with communities and with local authorities. And we have a lot of additional materials how to collaborate with different groups. Yeah. So that is better? Okay. With that, we also provide with a lot of material how to collaborate actually with groups in different countries. The second intellectual output, what we provided is a big sample with a lot of material how to collaborate actually on local scale. Is it better? I don't know. No, just maybe no.
Who's gone?
What's your hello.
Well, we're all going to be talking, and do you want me to do the last two slides? Yeah. So just, yeah, it's okay. We'll make a plan. We're a team. We've been doing this all the way through COVID. We've been picking up for each other. So, as Anne has really described what the project was about. It was a team of us getting together in different kinds of ways. The first thing we did was develop a toolkit, but we also wanted to develop a curriculum, a way that people could learn how to do collaboration. And so that was also thinking about a handbook that was going to accompany a course that could be undertaken, and a train the trainer's handbook that would go with that as well. Is that working now? Do you want to try now? Or should be working now. Just try it. Yeah, is that working now? That's okay. Go for it.
So besides train the trainer and the handbook that is actually still in process being established, we also have as a last output a navigator tool for all that. So this is based on the stepping stones that have been established by Schwen. It's going to help communities and local communes where they are in the process of collaboration, where they are in the process of establishing a project. And it's going to be in order to help different settings doing their work.
Okay.
I'm muted again. Now it's better, but now I'm done. Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh. Okay, so what were the kind of concepts we worked with? So we're researchers, as well as being in and of and with communities, we're also researchers. And we wanted to link what we were doing into theory. So there are kind of three different levels that I'm going to introduce now. The first is this idea of social innovation. And this is thinking about the idea of transitions in society, about how can we transform society. And within that, this image perhaps of communities being a little bit like bees pollinating. So they have these great ideas and they're very nimble and they buzz around and they pollinate. But sometimes in order to get flourishing from pollination, you also need plants that are deeply rooted, that are a little bit more stable. And so if you think of the bees that are pollinating these more stable, large, hard to move, large local authority trees, that's how we started to think about this particular project. The second conceptual kind of framework for this was to think about the multi-level perspective for sustainability transformation. We found this really helpful for us. So if you look in the bottom left-hand corner there, you see it says niche innovation. And the idea is that eco-villages and other intentional communities sit in this sort of corner and they're innovating and they're trying out new things. As Sylvia was just talking about, there are these kinds of laboratories of innovation. And then as you start to move, this is great, we're getting tech support here. Then as you start to move up that angle, you can start to get these new socio-technical regimes that emerge. And if you start to get them working together, you can start to achieve at a wider level, the socio-technical landscape and societal transformation. So the question in this project is really, how do we take those niches of innovation and how do we push them through to the next level there? And there are different theories for how this might work. So how these socio-technical niches function. So the first theory is thinking about them as being kind of strategic niche managements, where they're almost enclosed and they're a little bit separate from society in the way that they function. And that if they're left alone, that means that they can start to mature some of these different ideas. The second idea about these is broadly that we think about niche policy advocacy, and that these niches can start to demonstrate and then to advocate, to articulate to policymakers and people more widely why it is that we need these changes as well as how to do them. So starting to demonstrate solutions. And the third aspect is a little bit more of a critical niche perspective, which is not just serving the policy agenda, but sometimes providing a place of resistance, a place of discourse, a place of a different way of living, which can be disruptive at times, but which then can demonstrate again innovation in a different way. So there are different ways in which these niches might function within this wider context. And so that takes us to our research questions for the project, part of which we're going to present today. So the first one being, how do we scale what communities would call regenerative practices? Not necessarily scale up, but scale in different ways. At the same time, how do we implement and start to embed some of the local authority sustainability strategies in communities? So how do we support thriving collaborations for, in particular, these actors to work together and collectively achieve sustainability transitions? And with that, we had in our background these other questions that were emerging around how do we navigate the urgency, the ecological crisis in which we sit, along with relational trusting processes, what Carol White talks, the crisis of knowledge here. How do we balance the radical and the mainstream approaches? How much do we push on that? How do we balance change and resistance from working at local to regional scales? So those were our questions, and Paula is now going to talk about how we did that.
So as Anne was saying, as we approached the project to start doing some kind of collection of data, COVID hit. So a lot of these interviews kind of moved from being in person as we worked within eco-villages to moving online. And what we took was a qualitative research approach, and we've collected 22 semi-structured interviews that were kind of problem-centered and thinking through what are eco-villages and other community-led initiatives already doing, how are they already collaborating, and what can we learn from processes that are taking place in there. So we thought around kind of the questions that we asked were around kind of roles, recruitment, the sustainable development goals, but also how they're engaging with local actors in place around a wide range of movements, which I'll talk about soon. We've done a content analysis with that as a mixture of both inductive and deductive approaches to coding that information to kind of bring out from the ground up, as well as what we know from this conceptual framework to help us start to answer these questions. And from the 22 interviews, there's a huge range of roles, and importantly, the people that we interviewed often had multiple roles in community, and we found that to be something that's really important. So these were everything from community members, people that would define themselves as activists or academics or both, everything from third sector to NGOs, founders and co-founders to community members. So there's a broad range of people that were speaking to this topic, and a broad range of experience to draw upon as well. And we really think that the range of topics that we've been able to talk to people through and the projects that the interviews represent really talk in a broad way to regenerative practice, and from a more local authority level, you might want to think about how they map on to the sustainable development goals. So we talked about everything from community land ownership, conflict management, local currency projects, aspects of partnership, well-being, alternative education. So a really broad range of interviews. And we're really just focusing on how across all these different types of projects, we can start to see aspects of scaling up and of collaboration and how that's worked, or perhaps some of the challenges around how it hasn't worked so well. So one of the first things that we came up about is thinking about why people want to, what motivates people in community-led initiatives, eco-villages, or indeed even the local authorities or NGOs to collaborate with one another. And what we found is that a lot of this comes from the inspirations from elsewhere, other examples that we've had, and we hope that through these interviews and the online videos that we made from them, we can provide some of that inspiration going forward. But we really wanted to question whether this was about theory or practice or sometimes both. And I think that is what came out of the interviews, in that some people really came from an idea about, I want to do this, whereas other people had kind of a vision of what they wanted to achieve. And some people were really pragmatic in achieving these in some ways. Some aspects, it was a case where people were finding it from an individual level, where they had a dream and found the people that they wanted to collaborate to make that happen. Whereas other people came together and then worked on what they were looking for. And that's illustrated by some of the quotes that we have on the screen now, talking about this idea of a common dream or a vision, something slightly more specific that people might have wanted to work on. And then that pragmatism. So we have here that it was just the right thing at the right time, and that's what fostered collaboration. What we've learned from collaborating is that actually there's a few things that kind of need to take place and that we have to negotiate as we look to build collaboration. And these can broadly be themed around ideas of people, practice, and process. For people, our participants thought that one of the most important things, and this has come up over and over again, is around building trust and relationships. And that was both in listening and understanding what the local authority needs were and what the wider community needs were, and trying to find that common ground between them, ways of translating between the two. Part of that was not just thinking about the words that we use to do that, but also how we might bridge some of those values, look for something that is common. And we spoke about in this morning's panel about the importance of values. And I think that rang true in the data that we collected. And part of that is kind of bringing on board politicians, or in some instances, becoming a politician where you don't see that your values are reflected in the wider structure. So actually moving into those aspects. It also meant engaging diverse groups, so people understanding what difference brings to the process of collaboration. And collaborating with open-minded actors seemed to be something that was encouraged success in collaboration, whereas other people may have spoke to some barriers around the assumptions that people held about either the community or indeed communities about their local authority collaborators, or those that they chose not to start collaboration with. And lastly, it was about process. So importantly, recognizing that in both the kind of traditional community and the intentional community context, that process is grounded in tradition and in place. And that was really important. There was also the aspect of working at the right speed, and pace being something that needed to work at there. And I think that rang true in thinking about a little bit about the theory of this pace that we need to work to for global crisis. And that often local authorities, once pitched an idea to collaborate, wanted things to take place really quickly, and thinking about how you put the kind of right resources into making that happen. But also aspects of working with resistance and compromise in that regard as well, which is often about practicing conflict management and transformation. And we've got some really nice quotes there, and the one I just want to pick out of that kind of rings true across all three of these is here, which is using we instead of I. So approaching collaboration with the idea of what do we need to do to solve? So what do we as communities with local authorities, with NGOs need to solve? What is that common problem or value?
Thanks, Paula. So she's handing back to me with a complicated diagram, and we realize now it's very hard to see this from a distance. So I'm going to talk you through this. And basically what this shows is that when we started to map out who people were collaborating with from our interviews, it was not just as simple as community-led initiatives and local authorities. Of course it was not. In actual fact, it was it was this complexity of sometimes within a community it's a project or a transition group, and sometimes it's a whole community, and sometimes it's an eco-village, but then where are the boundaries of that and how does that function? Working with local authorities, but also sometimes directly with national government and international organizations. Working a lot, of course, with NGOs to facilitate those kinds of processes. We keep trying to push universities a little bit more in there, but we're not always as useful as we think we are. And then increasingly working also with the private sector, and some really beautiful examples coming out of our interviews of great collaborations there as well. So it's not just communities and local authorities is the thing to emerge from there. So what we're going to do now is just finish. Oh, sorry, I went back too far. No, I want to go into the scaling. Yeah, okay. So the results and discussion. So just the other thing we wanted to talk about as well as collaboration was scaling, and this idea that with scaling, we can see, we had a slide on the typology of scaling right at the very beginning, but our results showed something a little bit different that aligned with that. How do we get that transformation? So we could see scaling at a magnitude level from human to global, also at a spatial level from these local eco-villages beyond the boundary, beyond the tower to more regional levels, but also temporal scaling, immediate action, but with some of these initiatives taking 20, 30 years to actually happen in time. Numerical, bringing new and different groups on board, but also scaling in a context of deepening grounding in place to widen contributions, and scaling in terms of strengthening structures such as legislation, but also sometimes taking over social infrastructure. I don't seem to be very good at this. Okay, there we go. So just our final discussion slides now. So what does this actually mean in terms of what we were doing? So we think in terms of supporting collaboration to scale community action, we can think about 4 different aspects. The first is that we have to think about the human scale. It's all very well having these diagrams of niche innovation and socio-technical regimes, but it's actually people who are undertaking this and enabling the visions of individuals and appropriate communication is really important. Supporting trust and enabling communication, collaboration where you have a strong vision together with a smart idea based on local needs. And that communities also need roles to connect to other spheres and to pollinate in different ways. The second is excellent communication. So as we said before, the we of this, so being able to think with your collaborator, being able to respect and empathize, being able to provide pragmatic spaces, places, and opportunities, and work between individuals, groups, communities, and with local authorities and other actors. The last aspects of the discussion are thinking a little bit about focusing on the needs, and not just the needs that eco-villages feel that they have, but also the needs of people more and groups more widely, and being able to use and work with intermediary institutions to sometimes facilitate those kinds of contexts. And finally, thinking about transformation and what does our work tell us about transformation? So part of this is never to forget the vision and the initial goal that's actually emerged, and to be able to hold on to that, and to, at the beginning and as you're going through these sometimes difficult processes, to continue to hold on to a shared vision. Secondly, the transformation of people, practices, processes that Paula was just talking about, and transformation of structures to enable some of this to happen. And finally is conflict transformation. Conflicts will happen. Those deep, dark times will happen in any collaboration. So being prepared for them and being able to work through them. So when we go to back to this gruesome diagram at the very beginning again, I've got Anne in there who is actually working in community, on community, with community, and for community, in trying to think about those, I'm sure she loves this picture and the way it's been blown up, and trying to think about how people can actually be embedded within these very human processes that we have. So in conclusion, yeah, this has taken us back to the beach at St. Andrews. So we think that social and sustainable innovation benefits from excellent ideas, excellent conceptualization. We really need theory that researchers can provide, but of course that has to link to what people envisage and want and how they act out their particular beliefs. The collaboration is from people, sharing practices and creating processes in different kinds of ways. And so we don't ever want to forget that societal transitions should facilitate aspiration as well as action. Some people couldn't be with us here. Some people are with us in the audience or around. You'll spot them as you're going. So many people are involved in this team, and we're really grateful to Erasmus Plus for funding this project. We look forward to hearing some questions.
Thank you very much. Let's take a breath first. I've been sitting here for an hour. And yeah, take a minute to check in with yourself. Give some space also for those more subtle questions to land within yourself. And check in with yourself what questions you may want to ask. What's important enough to speak up right now? And then we will again have this two spaces in mind that we take. One question from on-site, in person, and another question from online. And I would like to start with a question from this room. So please go for it.
Hi, everyone. I just would like to know, where can we have access to the book that you referred, which is one of the outputs, the
Trainers
Communities and
Handbook.
Local Authorities in Collaboration, a handbook?
Yeah.
And also, if you could share the slides of this presentation with us, please, by email. Thank you.
We'd be very happy to share the slides, and that would be great. And the outputs will be completed totally, finally. We're hoping by the end of July, but the transmission will be happening from July through to August. We've already held the pilot Train the Trainers exercise, and we got some feedback to be able to improve these outputs. Do you want to give us a date, Taisa? Okay, so for those online, if you couldn't hear that, September, you'll be able to download them from the internet. And we hope people will use them. It'll be great.
Thanks. I just want to remind us that now we have half an hour for questions, answers, ideas, comments, whatever, on both presentations. So just to be clear on that, and then I would invite one question from the digital Zoom community.
Great. Yes, we have a question from Juan. So feel free to unmute yourself, Juan.
Hi there. I'm Juan from Newton D Campbell Community in Aberdeen. We've been looking to becoming part of Global Ecovillage network, and we've been working it towards sustainability in a more focused way for the past 2 years, even though Newton D has worked in sustainability since its foundation. Although at the beginning it seemed much more like that they were ahead of their time, and now we feel a bit like behind the new initiatives. And I was wondering, because we see it as a challenge that our intention as an intentional community is providing home and work for people with all kinds of abilities. And then to become an eco-village sometimes goes not so well in hand with our practices. I don't know, an example is, for example, that we need to provide, especially for the aging population, for the people that we care for, like really hot places, like the rooms. But then it goes a little bit against the sustainability part that we're trying to achieve. I was wondering if those handbooks that you were talking about have advice on this, or if there's any other cases that you know of becoming an eco-village without being an eco-village the main intention for the community. I don't know if I was too unclear, sorry.
I think my understanding of this question is that you're asking whether an intentional community has to become an eco-village and some of the difficulties around that in particular contexts when you have caring responsibilities, but also these opportunities of working with people from different abilities. Is that what is being asked?
It's more that we do want to become like an eco-village, but our main intention as an intentional community is to care for people with like different abilities, and then sometimes that doesn't go hand in hand, and sometimes we believe that we're not there yet to be called as an eco-village, even though we have multiple like initiatives for sustainability. So
hang on, people in the digital space cannot hear you. Yes, the mic. This is our awareness training.
Yeah, this is a Camp Hill community, I think, isn't it? So my understanding is that you don't have to become an eco-village, and you don't have to have the label of an eco-village, and there are lots of different ways of being intentional communities, and that the fantastic work that's going on in that area with people of all abilities is a different form of intentional community, which is really welcome. And when we talk about sustainability, to me, that kind of work and that kind of community is very sustainable, because it is in a way, because it's trying to address some of the social challenges that we have in our society about how to care for the aged, and how to do that in a way that is full of respect and that allows everybody to have dignity in different ways. So I think that there are particular labels here about eco-villages, but when we were working with groups, we were talking about eco-villages, different kinds of intentional communities, community-led initiatives. And in our project, we work particularly with permaculture and transition as models, but there are many more models of communities who are working together in different ways. So I hope that answers the question.
I just read from Sylvia that she also has a recommendation. So please unmute yourself and we can make this a more dialogical space.
Okay, yes, of course, I agree with what was said just before, but if you really would like to read a book, which is not a recipe book, but a kind of reference, Creating a Life Together, Practical Tools to Grow Eco-Villages and Intentional Communities, has been written by Christian and Diana Leaf, Leafi. And it's very interesting because you just get a kind of list of a lot of errors or a lot of situations that you could avoid by talking with people. It's a very good book about good sense, things to do that are quite logic, and just that always was said before, that first people have to talk and to be open. And this could be interesting, I guess, even if it's not a very, very recent reference. It's the base for eco-villages.
Oh, thank you. Christian, what? Sorry, again?
Leaf, Diana and Christian Leaf. Diana Leaf, Christian, sorry. Diana Leaf, Christian, you're right. I was wrong. Albert Pace, thank you, Albert, for correcting me. That's great. Diana Leaf, Christian. I made a mistake. I did it by from my old memories. So Leaf, you write it Leafe, like a leaf. Thanks with an E.
This reference. I hope this speaks to your question, Juan.
Thank you.
I would invite another question from on site.
First and foremost, thank you very much for your presentation. Although I wonder maybe it was better to sit at home, because it was very difficult to hear, and I had also problems with seeing the overheads. But anyway, I am the co-founder of Transition Towns in Denmark, so I guess I understood mostly what you said. My question is about imagination, because of course there is a framework here, what you have told us. We have to understand the character of this historic period we are living through just now. But we have from history similar events or communities who try to be alternative to what was up. For example, during the Spanish Civil War, but also today we have in Rojava, in the northeast of Syria, in the Kurdish societies, we have communities also building on values similar to what you told us here. So I think, and now you are not strategic or practitioners people, you are researchers. And therefore I think this imagination, this vision, what's the framework is very important. So my question to you is, have you done any studies about the Spanish Civil War, about Rojava in the northeast of Syria, and also could be something from the Russian Revolution also, where people also wanted to build new societies, bottom-up societies. Have you any research on that? Because that also gives a framework for the imagination. Do you understand my question?
You want to ask this to Sylvia?
Whoever wants to share thoughts on this question, that could be from the podium, that could be Sylvia, that could be anyone else from the audience.
I can answer it, but okay. So I personally have not worked in those particular areas. And I think you're right. There are examples from around the world, and there are examples from history, and there are examples from moments in history that we can learn from. Absolutely. This particular project is an Erasmus Plus project, which means it has to focus on Europe in a particular context from where the funding is coming from. I personally have worked in Mexico, Guatemala, and in Southern Africa. And members of our team are living in Latin America. So we have a kind of context in which we are drawing on different places, but not in northern Syria. So I'm going to have to go and look that one up, and I might come and find you later and ask you about that. Thank you for that.
Yes, I guess same for me. I don't have any concrete example from this part of the world. I'm sorry.
Maybe I can add on that, because I did a research on marginalized group in Namibia, and I did a lot of research on the Herero and Nama Var. And what we were focusing here on was more not about building up new communities, but how to collaborate closely with actually policymakers on local level. So this is the specificity on this project, where it's more about like, how can we actually bring our ideas on the local level as a community-based initiative? How can we do that better, and how are we better accepted? Actually, my PhD at the beginning, when the community took the place in a traditional village, they were very much marginalized. So my PhD, which was actually called "They Are Dancing Naked Around the Fire," because this is how they saw them. This is how community-led initiatives are often seen, that they are kind of hippies. But we were focusing in this project, like, how can the collaboration be successful? How can it be fruitful? And how can Like these hippies can be adapted, accepted in a political sphere. So this is where the focus was on here, just for you to see the line.
Right. Well,
No more
I'm just-
questions
yeah.
from the digital room? Then there would be space for another question from our audience.
Thank you. Thanks for this work. It's very powerful. I'm Joe from the United States. I want to ask you about diversity. You mentioned that in one of your slides, the challenges of diversity. And the context where I'm coming from, that's going to be connected to race, ethnicity, equity, justice questions. In this context that you're working, what are some of the challenges around navigating diversity and also equity?
So some of the examples that we had was thinking about kind of how they bring in things like women and who the change makers in society were. And so aspects around gender, but also around social kind of class and diversity of people that were working within communities. So breaking the boundary between the community-led initiative and wider communities as well. So there's a few different things that came.
Yeah, and regarding diversity in community-led initiatives, we also have to talk about a common ground of values. So diversity always embraces a lot of heterogeneity within one specific group, but actually this makes it way more complex being in one group and finding, for instance, a consensus when you have a high degree of diversity. So what I observed especially in network meetings of community-led initiatives, they are always watching out for diversity, for more diversity, and they have that in mind that it's kind of a white middle-class culture thing, and that's a big issue. Neither the more the communities look very careful who is able to adapt in that specific community. They are very different, like especially when I look in German eco-villages, there are some eco-villages where you can only step in when you bring in like 30,000 euro, for instance. And there are others that are communes, but they don't want you only because you have a lot of money, but they have a high expectation of your educational level, of the way you see the world, of your values you bring with you. So this makes the diversity quite small, actually, as you can probably imagine. However, there are certain communities, they embrace especially transgender people and or look especially about races, or as far as I can see, they have, for instance, there is a community that has a specific program on refugees, or there is a lot movement and cooperation with Ukraine at the moment. So there are certain focuses, but embracing that big diversity in one community is always like a really tough thing once you want to get to a certain vision, to a certain aim.
If I can add just very briefly to that answer as well. In our interviews talking about collaboration, more of our respondents saw diversity as an opportunity and an advantage than as a disadvantage, because it brought in different ideas. So it brought in the imagination, it brought in these different ideas, it brought in a different way of being. It meant that one group couldn't take over in a context. So in collaboration, when you start working not just within the community, but beyond the community, it can be seen in a very positive light.
All right. There another question, not in the Zoom? Yes, but in the audience.
Thank you. Well, I think again that the basic issue is about alternative or integration. Because as Ross Jackson told us this morning, what we have realized is that we have an alternative culture who takes care on the earth, on the human relations? Or do we really want a top-down model so we can earn money on these ideas? So again, it's an issue about integration. What we have experienced in this historic period. Do we want to earn money on that? Or do we believe that our culture, where we do not accept the market conditions, should be better? So integration or believe in our culture from our alternative societies and communities. That's for me a main issue. Thank you.
You go first.
I think we just talked about it when I was sitting there and raised up exactly or a question in that area. And again, what we were focusing here on was not about integration, but how can the ideas, the projects, and whatever these people on the ground, the bottom-up initiatives want to implement in the world, how can they do that? And how can they be successful in that? So it's not about integration into this current system, but it is like, how can we achieve these results we want to achieve on a local scale? This is all about it. And therefore, we need to collaborate actually with local actors. And we were approaching like really successful projects. And we also had some examples where they weren't successful and where they had really trouble with the local authorities or with the council. And we really were disappointed with it and said, it's so hard going with them and like they're not accepting us at all. And so we were looking in this kind of research. So how can it be successful and what are actually the factors that makes it successful to like broaden it, to be accepted in a village, to be a real alternative. And that maybe, like Camilla said in the panel this morning, these normal traditional villages say, well, in order to transform the rural areas, every village should have an eco-village because they bring in a lot of innovations here, and they kind of bring another culture with us, and they kind of do climate change projects that will help the local sphere to improve or energy car sharing, whatever. What is happening actually, and in many aspects, like for instance, just for electric car charging, you need the local authorities in order to implement that station there, or forest kindergarten, alternative school. There are many examples where just because you want to bring that thing into the world, you need the cooperation. And yes, so it's not more about integration, but how to bring it up, how it's possible. Mm-hmm.
So far for now, we're gonna leave it here, and I hope that you leave with lots of questions because we are just in the beginning of this conference.
Gerriet, I just would like to if I may, I just would like that Anne-Kathrin said. Yeah, so I will be very quick, fast. About alternative or integration. It can be both. It's not a non-answer. It's kind of ideological position. And what Anne-Kathrin said, that it's more about collaboration with the local system to be integrated. I guess it's more about that. And I have actually a good example that I studied, La Cité Ecologique in Quebec. Close to Montreal, 2 hours from Montreal. They really have a very interesting system for that. And I will say very shortly. Actually, in the 80s, when they were founded, they were considered as a sect. And with the years, they installed the communities, and now they are providing more than 50 jobs for a place, a territory that is really in a bad economic situation. And they have installed so many possibilities of collaborations between the community and the local territory, even in the touristical, political instance meetings and governance levels, that they are now really part of the country, but they are still themselves. They are still an alternative. And I guess maybe you should have a look on them, their initiative. They are very inspiring. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thanks. And I'm sure that there will be more inspiring connections within the next panels. I already started to relate it to Camilla's presentation on developer-led projects of eco-villages. And we have another few sessions. The next one will be at 4 p.m. Where you can again choose between several presentations. And now we will have half an hour of break, coffee, and hopefully the possibility to chat one-on-one with the presenters and each other. So thank you for presenting, for participating, and for all the tech support. And yeah, let's close this with a warm applause.